Welcome to SRV, Hawaii, where we have just finished our arati, as you can see, and we're welcoming in all of our live streaming audience, those of you around the world who are tuning in at this time. If it's not 2 in the morning where you are, or some other place, because here we're on Hawaii Standard Time, and therefore it's just dusk. And Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said that at dusk, when you can no longer clearly see the hairs of your arm, that you know that it's time to go and worship, or sit in silence and remember, because dusk and dawn have a very auspicious import in the daily routine, where light turns to darkness and dark comes back to light. Darkness and light are one of the two great dualities, and actually have to be both transcended. Even the inner light has a sort of transcendence to it that you have to apply to it when you kind of dizzy. When you first see the inner light, you get dizzy, they say, so you have to stabilize yourself in that light. So the light of this world is really a symbol of the light of Brahman, and so is the darkness of this world a symbol of the darkness of ignorance, or could even be the darkness of Mother Kali. This is the Kali Yuga, after all, the age of Kali, and we need a very powerful figure like Mother Kali and her avatar, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, whom we've just done worship to tonight here at dusk in Hawaii, to penetrate through the ignorance of the mind. And that's where this darkness collects. It's the kind of darkness that we don't see, but we intuit it or we feel it in our meditations, also in sleep, and sometimes in our everyday life we feel the limitations come upon us, and we feel like we want to be free and break out of those limitations. So if we know the symbology of darkness and light, then we can apply it on, guess how many levels? 3. The famous triputis that come to us of these triple teachings. In this case, we can apply it at the level of the gross and subtle and causal worlds, or at the level of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, or the level of the light of the sun, the light of intellect, and the light of the ocean of Brahman, called Chit Jyoti, or sometimes this Jyotish, Jyotishmata, meditating on the sorrowless ocean of light, as Father of Yoga has told us. So here, as dusk turns to darkness, then we meet on this evening, which is sacred to Divine Mother, Tuesday night, and we enter into what's called Satsanga, and so we welcome all of you to it, and we've already taken some questions from you that you've sent in, and so I'm going to read those questions and give you answers. That'll be our satsang. And we've already been taking questions here amongst our little group locally as we've met before you joined us. Now we have these questions that have come from our viewing audience from different places of the world. We're so happy to be able to be with you at this very moment. Even though we're in different time zones, we are in one eternal moment together, not only figuratively, if they say, but literally. So in this one moment, let's take these questions and listen to the answers that come forth. One person writes in, we have 8 limbs of yoga, but does it apply to each of the 4 yogas? And if so, which ones? So basically, the 8 limbs of yoga that are being asked about here are called Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga, or sometimes it's called Patanjala, named after its founder, Patanjali, because he was such a great luminary that he had one of the main darshanas of India named after him. Such was the reverence that was paid to him. So Raja Yoga, or the Kingly Yoga, or Patanjala, sometimes called Ashtanga Yoga, but you have to be careful nowadays with that term because it's being misrepresented. Sometimes you go to something that says Ashtanga Yoga and all they're teaching is one limb, one or two limbs. So if it says Ashtanga Yoga, you know that it really probably authentically or originally should be hooked in with meditation and samadhi, and that asana and breathing and what we were talking about just before our live audience joined us, this 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, including austerity, and those kinds of practices are all part of the 8-limbed yoga. So, pertinent to this question, that's a yoga of its own. And when you bring up then the 4 yogas, you're talking about these 4 great yogas that suit the 4 temperaments of human beings, and which Swami Vivekananda sort of crystallized and brought to us in this day and age when he had joined us in 1893 at the Parliament of Religion in Chicago. I myself showed up at the 100-year centenary of that in 1993 and presented Vedanta teachings and music there 100 years later. So in that original time when Swami Vivekananda joined us, he was talking in terms of the 4 yogas that suited the 4 kinds of temperaments. That is, if you were very interested in meditation and samadhi, this definitive Raja Yoga, it's called, this kingly yoga, this royal road to radiant reality, then you would practice this 8-limbed yoga and start off with the yamas and niyamas and so forth, and that would suit a more contemplative temperament, a person who is able to sit still for long periods of time, and particularly not just still the body, but still the mind, which is a much harder task, as those of us know who have tried to do it and failed, and who must keep trying again and again, day to day, because just like dusk and dawn again, sometimes in broad daylight you don't feel like meditating, but if you wait till dusk and sit down, all of a sudden a new mood takes you, because the whole atmosphere is changing when light turns to darkness, and you feel a certain presence in that. Not just a cosmic presence, as this cosmic has to do with the universe, but cosmic has to do with the inner deities and how you're able to tune in with them in a vibrational way, much easier than during a busy time of day. Although there are people at work who basically just put everything aside for a half hour and even right there at work have a little meditation period. It's very good for peace of mind and for balance. So that Raja Yoga anyway suits the contemplative temperament. So we should remember that it's a yoga of its own. Doesn't necessarily have to be correlated with the other 3 yogas, but I think it probably should be integrated. Synthesis of yoga, or Purna yoga, or integral yoga is some of the words that are being used in a person who has all 4 of these yogas and wants to bring them to bear and be a well-rounded spiritual aspirant. That other yoga we're talking about then, the second one is karma yoga, and that suits the active temperament. It's a good yoga to learn the rules of, like the most famous rule of karma yoga would probably be to the work you have the right, but not to the fruits thereof, as we've talked about in the Bhagavad Gita before. And so sort of hands off of the fruits, just let them happen as they will, and just keep doing the work in a focused way, and then watch the results come without karma. Karma yoga is then very well named. And it suits that active temperament, and since all of us are so active on this world, in this bhutakasha, in this bur loka, this world of physical things, and we all have to, by the very nature of our body and the heart pumping and the lungs pumping and so forth, have to be active. Even when we sleep, there's action going on in the dream state. So very important to become masterful at the yoga of karma yoga. That's the second yoga. And if we want to bring these up in that sort of order, Raja Yoga is the yoga of meditation. That would be the yoga of inaction, ultimately. And then Karma Yoga would be the yoga of action. So quite often these two are sort of at loggerheads. They've been proposed by different thinkers, although these thinkers obviously weren't very deep thinkers. that these two are antagonistic of one another, but they're not. The action and inaction is, again, one of the great dualities to ponder in your mind and to master. Every duality leads to a triputi, then this is how great souls have found themselves to oneness, to unity, is by contemplating these things, thinking about them deeply. And contemplation yoga then is going to be very helpful to you, isn't it? To contemplate on what just happened in your day, for instance. So here's where you end your work day and go home, and something's happened to you that's either very good or not very good, as the case may be, and you can sit with it and look at it and witness it and dispel it on the spot. Because if you don't look at it and dispel it on the spot, a residue accumulates in your mind, and you carry it the next day into work. And then that residue is the foundation for future karma. And those karmas are foundations for future samskaras. These are all words in Sanskrit that I can use to give teachings, but unless you've learned a little Sanskrit, you won't be able to understand them, because the English language doesn't contain words like those. And, the closest thing we can come to an English equivalent to the word Sanskrit is mental complex, but the idea of mental complex is something that you develop in this lifetime and probably carry with you your whole lifetime, and it all ends at death. But the idea of a samskara in Indian philosophy is something that you come across a complex in your mind that's already been developed in a previous lifetime. That's why it's there, and so that explains its presence. And then you try and dispel it before it becomes a cut, a groove in the mind. Like Sri Ramakrishna would say, you cut with a knife, make a cut and let it heal, and cut again and make it heal, and cut again and make it heal. Eventually you have what's called a scar tissue. Well, the mind is just like that with these actions that you're doing over and over again, both good and bad, by the way, not just negative. And that sort of scar tissue that develops in the internal parts of the mind are samskaras, and those samskaras are very hard later on, like scar tissue, to try and get rid of, to try and neutralize. So that kind of action, karma yoga, if not nicely married to and conjoined with the meditation yoga, then is going to result in these repercussions that come from karma yoga, from poorly done. So let nobody say that Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga are antagonistic of one another, not in my presence anyway, or they'll hear some of what I have to say about that. These yogas are to be integrated, and they're very helpful to one another. Now, that's two of the yogas. Remember, in direct answer to your question, the eight-limb yoga is its own yoga, and it doesn't necessarily need to be correlated to the other three, but it should be integrated with them, is what I'm saying. So karma yoga is the second, and then the third we know is bhakti, which we just participated in at our own altar here before you joined us for satsang. We sang a hymn to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Om Hring Ritang Tamachalo, Gunajit Guneja. You are master of the gunas and you are beyond the gunas. That is beyond the modes of nature. Another Sanskrit word we don't really have a very good equivalent for in English, guna. So bhakti yoga has to do with this devotions that we participate in. As we were just talking before the live audience joined us, that this is one of the austerities of the body, according to Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, is that you might think fasting is some sort of austerity and so forth. Well, it's all well and good, but the real masterful and more substantial austerities of the body would be worship, he says. Using your body to worship the Lord with form, obviously. Because in the meditation yoga, what you're going for is the formless Brahman, eventually. You're going through form to formlessness. In the bhakti yoga, you're pretty much preoccupied with the highest rendering of God in form that the human mind can conceive of. You want the ishtam, the chosen ideal, the ultimate form like the Christ for the Christians and Buddha for the Buddhists and Krishna for the Hindus and so forth. There are these icebergs in the ocean of consciousness that have congealed, that the sun of wisdom will never melt. They're crystallized into these eternal principles, and so humanity will never forget words like Christ, Jesus, and Krishna, and Kali, and great names for the Lord like that. And there are even names for the formless God, which some religions don't like to use, they like to stay away from, but nevertheless there are designations for God with form and God with form, beyond form and with form, and these are both okay to the Vedantist. So these are, bring them on, because there's a third thing out there called Maya, and that's not giving us anything that we want in any sensible way, you see. So why not worship God in form? And if you get to the Father through the Son, then encounter the Son first, because the Son is very beautiful. The way I've always put it is, you need friends in high places. So if you enter into spiritual life, it's very good to have, maybe you can know a God here and a goddess there, an angel, a celestial, some guardian angel, as they say, or maybe you know the ultimate reality in form, Ishvara or Ishvari. Maybe you know her or him, and hasn't transcended gender yet, but nevertheless, you're in gender, and you're in the world, and you're in the body, so it's very helpful to you to see a form like you in this place called within you, the kingdoms of heaven that were within you. So I shouldn't linger too much on any one yoga, but you see how I can get started and begin to, because they're also full and rich. So that's the third yoga, this yoga of bhakti. There's not enough time in the day or even in a week retreat to cover it. And then the fourth is Jnana Yoga, which is that yoga of wisdom. Now, interesting order again. We had the yoga of action and inaction, but now we come to the third and fourth yoga, the yoga of wisdom and the yoga of devotion. Those two have also sometimes, by less mature thinkers, been pitted against each other. But really, they are just headed for the same place, this apex, where Brahmajnana, the highest wisdom, will meet Prema Bhakti, the most ecstatic love. And on the way, they are also rivers that are mingling. You see, on the way to that confluence, they're mingling. You know what you love, and you love what you know. When you think about it, then even the driest intellectual has a love, doesn't he? It's wisdom or knowledge. And the most ecstatic singer and dancer has to know the songs and know the chords and know how to dance and how to sing, know the words. So wisdom and devotion are fused intrinsically all the time, cannot be removed. And it's the case with all four of these yogas. They're like some sort of Rubik's Cube, Can't really take it apart, but you can position it so that you can see that they're intrinsically connected. And that's going to be good for you. So a little expose on the four yogas, making sure that we don't confuse, not that you were, but we don't confuse the eight-limbed yoga, those 8 limbs, with these other 3 or 4 yogas. They are each one not airtight compartments, but they each are a path of their own, and they also apply to our temperament. In other words, so to finish out what I was saying, Bhakti Yoga applies to the devotional temperament, and then Jnana Yoga applies to the studious temperament. Whereas, as I already said, the yoga of Raja Yoga applies to the contemplative person, and the yoga of action applies to the active person. So I hope that answers at least some portions of that question, and if not, just rephrase it and send it back to us. We're going to keep doing this as long as we can. Now, let's go on to a next question, if any live questions come up, those are nice to entertain too, so interrupt me if you will. We have both a live audience here and a live audience there. We're all living. We're all sentient. We're all aware. We're all conscious. We're all bestowed with this timeless, deathless awareness that is our inner self, and that's what we celebrate when we sit down to spiritual life, whether it be in any yoga at dusk, We like to think at dusk. We like to worship at dusk. We like to meditate at dusk. Maybe we don't like to act at dusk so much. But the lips moving is a kind of action. So even that, hearts go on beating and so forth. So the four yogas are right here, now, well and alive in all of us that are joining in together. Now another question here is, and this is one I've heard before, I don't understand what the difference is between Brahman and Atman. If they are both my true self, then why these two words? So that's oftentimes asked. Probably to cut to the chase, the quickest answer that's most satisfying is that Brahman and Atman are one and the same, they're identical, but oftentimes in philosophical treatises and scriptures and so forth, they say that Atman has that identification with the five koshas still. Five koshas means the body, one's energy, one's mind, one's intellect, and one's ego complex. So those are the five sheaths. Koshas are called sheaths or covering. You know how when you were a boy you sat in the grass and you picked a piece of grass and you pulled the inside of the grass from the outside of the grass and ate the sweet part. So you had to kind of pull a little hard and without snapping it. There was this sit there and eat little pieces of grass. Eat the green, as we say here. So just like that, everything is a sheath that's inside of something else, very subtle like that. So these five sheaths are non-self. That's how they're described. It's a teaching we don't get very much in the West, and even in today's world we think, yes, this is myself, I'm myself. I'm myself when I'm angry, I'm myself when I'm happy, I'm myself whatever. But that's the changing self, obviously. And that witness self inside is not any of the five sheaths or any of their characteristics. Like the body might be fat or thin, or you might be thinking in your mind, I'm fat or thin, or I'm too fat or I'm too thin. But those aren't the Atman. It's not the Atman you're talking about there, that's these five sheaths. So in that case, the Atman is there as a witness, and it's, you could say, temporarily identifying with the five sheaths. Now, in the case of a person who has an inkling that he's not the five sheaths, that there's something else, a soul, or whatever you might want to call it, has some sort of intuition that there's another presence deep within that doesn't have to do with anything, even his ego, which is very subtle. And that kind of person, then he's kind of a jivatman. He's kind of waking up to the fact that the Atman is within everything. Probably within isn't even a very good word, because it's neither within nor without. It's just all pervasive. The within and the without are all in Atman, you might say. It's all containing and all pervasive. Now, if that Atman were to lose its identification with the five sheaths, which is, by the way, what happens in maybe 4 different times in your life, once in deep sleep, once at death, once in a very good non-dual meditation, and another time in samadhi, the highest samadhi, all of a sudden the Atman loses its identification or casts off its identification with the five sheaths, then it's Brahman. Automatically it's Brahman. It always was Brahman, but it had this sort of congealed itself down to this idea of being a composite body-mind mechanism. See? A psychophysical being. Those are 2 words, phrases that you hear in Vedanta a lot. Psychophysical being, body-mind mechanism. To sort of be able to put it down into a simplest couplet as possible so that we can look at it and get some distance from it. Because once we do get some distance from it, then we know there's a witness looking on. And when we identify with that witness, we can disidentify with the five sheaths and identify with Brahman. And then Atman is Brahman. And Brahman is Atman. So that's probably one of the best and easiest ways to explain that conundrum of there being more than one word for your true self. Actually, Brahman and Atman are just 2 amongst a whole plethora of words in Sanskrit that refer to your true self. So anyway, that helps us a little bit to understand that. There are other nice ways of thinking of Brahman and Atman too, and describing it, but I think you get the point there. There are stories, for instance, like the wave that came up on the ocean and yelled out to his wave companions, "I am the ocean." And then all the other waves around laughed at him. And then he got very humiliated, so he went back down into a a trough, yes, a trough or a hollow. As he disappeared back down, got depressed, in other words. And then he thought about it in his depression, and next time he came up he was a little wiser, and he said, "I am water." And all the other waves started to laugh at it, but then they scratched their watery heads and said, "He's right, we're all water. We're not the ocean, but we are water." So in that way you could describe Brahman and Atman too, that Atman is this wave, because it's still got this identification with body-mind mechanism, so it still has this dream going on, that it's a complex form, that it has something to do with all these insentient things, this amalgam of insentient things. Things that change, because even thought is just going on forever. If you think, "Oh, I'm a mind with thought, and I am my thoughts," then you try and look for some common or solid ground in there, and you can't find any, because there's always this shifting ground of thought that's going on. And so to find something that's absolutely still is your quest. You finally arrive at something that's absolutely still, and when you do, that's called enlightenment. And you have deep insight now, and you've had a truly spiritual experience where everything before could be said to be sort of nocturnal twistings and turnings in the bed of your body-mind mechanism, in the bedroom. Now you actually had experience of the stable, of the immovable, of the indivisible, of the absolute, that is stationary in one place, and that impresses you. That's why Christ was the way he was in the wilderness, stunned, and why he sat so long that grains fell into his hair and birds then started to peck them out and eat them, because he was in a stunned state of consciousness. In our tradition that's called jada samadhi. So that's a state that's sort of a precursor to a fuller realization. You've actually seen yourself as separate from every other created thing, and that means that you're not created. It's a very beautiful thing, isn't it? That everything else has been created by something. Nature, mind, however you want to put it, but you're a create. That you're the one indivisible principle out of which all of this creation, as a dream as it were, spilled out of you. And so that's very marvelous. And if you can somehow put it into words through some Atma-vichara process, like this person, thank you for the question, who just wrote me and gave me a chance to try and explain a little bit about it, then we have actually a way in words with our intellects to understand that there is such an experience like that, and then maybe we have a chance to understand what Ramakrishna felt all the time when he was in bliss, and why he was in bliss without owning a thing. When rich people would come to him and say, "We've got thousands and thousands of rupees in our bank account, but we're not happy. Look at this man. He doesn't have a thing, and he's not only is he happy, he's beyond happy. He's blissful all the time." So this idea of Atman and Brahman can be explained and leads to a lot of deeper understanding. So if you find confusion in the teachings, say, "Good." Don't say, "I give up," or "It's a contradiction," or "He doesn't know what he's talking about." That's what you want, is confusion in the mind. This is a teaching that was given to me by Lex Hickson, our founder, in SRF associations when I was still in my 20s, and I was complaining of confusion and so forth. He said, "Oh, that's very good. That's a good sign. Be confused and start to work your way out of it." So this is again back to this idea of contemplating dualities. You don't just take them for granted and let them, and then live amongst them. Living amongst the dualities without checking them out is sort of like living in a dark cave with a bear. Huge cave. You never see one another, but you may bump into one another unpleasantly before long. You see, so you don't want to leave it to chance. You want to know what's going on. So Atman and Brahman, two words for the same thing. Brahman, the ocean of consciousness with never a separation, with no boundaries. Pure conscious awareness, timeless, deathless consciousness. Atman, the same thing, only has delimited itself, or limited itself to a complex temporarily. And the famous story is you just take an empty jar and dip it into the ocean and cap it off, and that's the Atman in there. See, you've just added a superimposition that's contained some of it. Apparently so. Put it back under the water again. Take a stone from the seashore and just bust it, underwater. Water becomes one with water. So, or space in a jar. A lot of the stotrams of India, I could sing you a couple right now, talk about space in a jar. It's the same as the space outside the jar. So it's this body-mind mechanism, it's this jar or series of jars. So Atman is within it, as it were. Is it trapped? Not in all cases. In most cases, yes. Probably trapped unbeknownst to itself, dreaming without awakening for many lifetimes. But in many cases, the covering has been taken on purpose. And that's a place we want to get to. We want to get to a place where, if we're going to be reborn again, we should be reborn purposefully, with knowledge of what we're getting into. As a master, better yet as a past master. And if you can't do that, then go find a master or a past master who will tell you the method of how to awaken to that. Let's go on, because we still have good time. And there's a third question. The causal body correlates to the Anandamaya kosha. Well, we were just talking about the koshas. This is the kosha of the ego. The fifth one, which is the subtlest, covering over Atman. It might be, the thinnest veil. The hardest to get rid of, too, because it is so transparent. It's hard to see. It's called the sheath of bliss, but the causal body is said to be in a state of ignorance. How can a sheath of bliss be in a sheath of unknowing? How can a sheath of bliss be a sheath of unknowing? Because any sheath which is being identified with by a consciousness, then, of course, is the non-self. And as we've just explained, there's also another way of saying that the state of ignorance that a person in is called, that all beings are in, is called root ignorance, mula vidya. It's a primal nescience. It's like this big curtain. Sometimes they call it the curtain of nescience or the cloud of unknowing. In Buddhist schools, they'll talk about that too. And it falls over you in deep sleep. So basically, you are closer to that fifth sheath in deep sleep, the Anandamaya kosha, and you feel free of form. You've cast off all your problems that were there in the waking state, and you've given up dreaming, which is a good thing to do eventually. To wake up. That's enlightenment. And so now you're in the state of deep sleep. Sushupti, they call it in Sanskrit. Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti. Sushupti is that deep sleep state that they've examined. Again, not content just to say, oh, I had a good sleep last night, you see. And they've said that for years and years and lifetimes, and they're still saying to each other, oh, I had a good sleep last night, or I had a bad sleep last night. But finally, some great soul said, what is that good sleep? I'd like to see what happens there. So maybe I should take my consciousness into deep sleep with me. What a novel idea, you see. I should actually remain awake when I go to sleep. And eventually that turns into knowing the art of yogic insomnia, basically. To turn a phrase that, again, like Sixon coined when he was in the body. So you look into the deep sleep state and you find that's that curtain of nescience there, that when you come out of it you forget everything that you experienced there. Because what's there in the deep sleep state is the potential for everything. That's about as simple as I can put it without giving a vast teaching on unmanifested prakriti. Prakriti is the word for nature, and we see nature all around us. But they say what we see all around us, even in terms of billions of suns and planets in the sky, is the tip of the iceberg of what nature is capable of. This is just the formed part of nature. But the unformed part of nature is called unmanifested prakriti, and if we were to connect with that, we would know where all of this came from. From the infinite, the finite has come, as the ancient rishis said in the Upanishad. But being infinite, only infinite remains. So it's all infinite. But where is that line of demarcation that separates matter in form from matter without form? And if there is a line of demarcation, and I can mark it or note it and call it, one side is waking and dreaming and the other side is called deep sleep, then I might be able to pierce through that line of demarcation with my consciousness in tow and see what is there in deep sleep, the infinite potential of everything. In unmanifested form. They call it in potential. It's held in abeyance. These are terms that you find when you read the Vedantic books and so forth. It's held in abeyance, or it's in potential. They try and hint at it with a series of English words. But you'll find that when you contemplate it, you've always thought about that too. When you talked about God's mind, when you were in high school and you wanted to impress your friends, you said, well, God has a mind too. Maybe if you were a more intrepid high schooler. And then people go, oh, that's a profound thought. See? But that's what you're calling God's mind, the Mahat, is that overseer of all that unmanifested prakriti. It's all held back there in the mind of God. Or you could say in the Word. In the beginning was the Word. See, those kinds of familiar statements to us are pointing towards that abundance of potential that's back there. And so your deep sleep state, they correlate it with that. I hope I'm not getting too far away from the actual question. As far as ignorance goes, then, if you're in unmanifested nature, yes, you're still in the state of ignorance, because God, Brahman, and Atman, Paramatman, is beyond manifested and unmanifested nature. And that's a very precious thing to find out. And if you read your Gita enough, you will trip over it enough times, because Krishna is saying it again several times to Arjuna in the 18 chapters on the discourse that he's given on the battlefield there at Kurukshetra. He says, at one time he says, that's my eightfold body, mind and senses and so forth. That's my Puryastika body. That's my manifested nature. Now, hear about my unmanifested nature. And he talks about everything that's in potential. Then, at the end of that little discourse, he caps it all off by saying, but beyond the manifested and the unmanifested nature, know my true nature, Arjuna, as the Lord of all the worlds, as Brahman. So, there again are three very powerful things to meditate, right? The manifested, the unmanifested, and the supremely unmanifested. You had lowercase manifested and unmanifested, but when you wrote down supremely unmanifested, you'd uppercase both words, so that you know that you're referring to Brahman and not unmanifested nature. It's a little bit complex, isn't it? You don't know how complex it is, but if you saw everything that was inside of you, you'd be in a stunned state, wouldn't you? Do I have to retrace myself back to what I was just saying, why Christ was in a stunned state? Because if you see everything that's within you, you get stunned. You cannot believe it. And retracing further back to the 8 limbs of yoga, that's one of the names of the samadhis. That basically if you have savichara samadhi and savitarka samadhi, you've seen everything that's within you. All knowledge lies within you, as the father of yoga says. And when you see it, you're completely drawn into it. And you're lost in it. And people don't know what happened to you, and you don't know what happened to you. Sort of like deep sleep, isn't it? Only in this case, you've done it wide awake, with your eyes closed in meditation. All of a sudden you've come across this state of samadhi, And with your consciousness fully awake, you've beheld everything within you, and got stunned. They were wordless. You didn't have anything more to say. And so the next state of samadhi, interestingly enough, is that you began to focus in on little particles. You know where I'm going with this, I think, or Sunday classes. You began to focus in on these little particles in your own consciousness in this ocean of awareness, of potential. And that's when you get to the savitarka, nirvitarka level. You're beginning to pull out little bits of that infinite consciousness, like bits of bliss, and unwrap them and look at them. And now you're on your way towards higher and higher samadhis. So these actually have some very interesting correlations on all these paths: Vedanta, Buddhism, Yoga, Samkhya, and the Gita, Krishna's yoga. Is that they've been saying these same things pretty much relating to the very same principles, but in their own different ways, in their own different ages. But when you come upon them, then you can begin to answer questions like this. So yes, you're kind of in a state of ignorance in deep sleep, because you don't wake up. As my teacher used to say, you go to sleep a fool and you wake up a fool. You might have had the greatest blissful experience in deep sleep ever, but you forget it as soon as you wake up. That curtain just goes right back down and falls on everything you saw there with your inner eye. See? It just falls right back down, doesn't it? So you end up saying, can I keep that curtain open for a while? Now, a profound dream that you had just coming out of deep sleep into the highest apex of the dreaming state stays with you sometimes. And so you could say the curtain of nescience actually fell, but it must have hit some sort of barrier, and a little bit of it was left open, you see. So some of the light from unmanifested deep sleep is coming through. So you're walking around, wow, I remember that dream. That's really powerful, you see. And it impresses you for days. You should, according to the father of yoga, go meditate on that dream. That's why you get up at a certain time in the morning, because you want to look at everything that happened to you that night. You might recall something of great import that could be extremely valuable to your spiritual life in this particular lifetime. A real turning point. So, when you say ignorance, then, dear questioner, remember we're talking about root ignorance, which is very thick, very subtle, and that is a veil for everyone. I would say even illumined souls probably have a hard time passing through it, unless they're, again, past masters. Because you might have noticed many of the great souls that you've read about or heard about did not really get illumination, come out of the womb illumined. See? They had to deal with some things, didn't they? With the world. So if you come into this world of waking, dreaming, that all came out of deep sleep, the deep sleep potential has everything in potential. You might walk out of there with a Tyrannosaurus, see, or with Elvis Presley or something, see. And that might not be a good thing. So everything is back there in unmanifested prakriti, and so you would probably want to know what you're doing. And so meditation then, to finish this question, meditation then would be to sit there and sort of reflect on your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. People are into meditating on their dreams. That's one of 7 ways that the father of yoga wants you to practice. But meditating on deep sleep is more the Advaitic way. It's Gaudapada's way of Shankara's teachers of cutting to the chase. Because that is, if you want to put it in this way too, here's form, right? And then there's formlessness. And then there's supreme formlessness. That's another way of saying manifested, unmanifested, and supremely unmanifested, that Krishna says in the Gita. So if we want to make correlate the Gita with Gaudapada's Karka, then we would just change the terms. Manifested means all of form that we see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. and that we dream about, because there's forms in our dream. And then formlessness means deep sleep, because we're not dreaming or waking there. We don't know what's going on there. We just know that we feel great when we wake up out of deep sleep, even if we're only there for 20 minutes. And then formlessness with a capital F would be that supremely unmanifested Brahman. So if you don't want to give a God a name rather, then you just say supremely unmanifested, or formlessness with a capital F. Then you're not stepping on anyone's toes. You're not involving yourself with religious denominations unnecessarily. So, good question about the causal body, the state of ignorance that's upon us, and how it applies with bliss. Then would be that there is a state beyond bliss. There are other things, because in yoga, again, one of those samadhis, in fact, probably the last samadhi you will get to is called Sananda. Sa means with, and Ananda means bliss. So you're having a samadhi with bliss. And there are samadhis beyond that. Sasmita is samadhi with the sense of I, not the sense of ego I, because that's getting ousted out of the equation, but the sense of the true I is coming. And then beyond that, you leave the seated samadhi region, sampragyata, seated samadhi, and you get into the unseated samadhi. There's only one of those. That's formlessness with a capital F. And you have then destroyed ignorance, rent the curtain of nescience asunder, and you're one in all four realms. Doesn't it sound a bit like what we studied last 2 weeks, last 2 Sundays, AUM and Turiya? Right? Don't you remember the quote from class? When you leave the A, U, and the M unconnected, you wander in the 3 worlds, and you're lost. But if you connect them, you'll realize Turiya. So you can see here, we're bringing the teaching of Om back into it, how it also correlates with these other triputis that are so important. You must master your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state in order to realize the Turiya, the fourth. The fourth would be formlessness with a capital S, would be asampragyata samadhi, would be nirvikalpa samadhi in Vedanta, or it would be the supremely unmanifested in the Bhagavad Gita, according to Krishna. This is the way Sri Ramakrishna taught, by way of connections. You read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you'll see how many beautiful connections he's making all the time. Only problem there is you don't know where he's pulling them from. So you have to study a little of each of these things, yoga, Sankhya, Buddhism, Vedanta. Familiarize yourself. Like Sri Ramakrishna used to say, be like a general store owner. Like you're a dime store owner, right? Used to have dime stores. I think they disappeared. Now they're dollar stores or something. But if you're a general merchandise store owner, you know a little bit about everything. So anyone asks you about anything, you have a ready store of knowledge about that little item that's on the shelf here and there. See? So it's good too philosophically to familiarize yourself with each of these things. And, it's very good for your Jnana Yoga part of you. And then it's going to be good for the other 3 yogas too, isn't it? All of them are going to be healthy. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes, is it right? And so 10 minutes more to spend with everyone around the world. Is there a nice feeling? And there are 2 more questions. Let's see if we can take them. How does a student in high school live a spiritual life? Almost none of my friends are interested, and my home life is chaotic. Yes, I've seen that. We've seen that here too in our lovely Hawaii, how many of the houses are, you walk into them and maybe 3 TVs going on, full blast, in 3 or 4 different rooms. The parents are yelling at each other, sometimes not with very nice words, and the children are all at each other's throats. You know, how does a person who might want to seek peace, what to speak of his true nature, let's just get peace first. How does he do that? And so this is coming definitely from one of my teenage students out there that I'm find very precious. And probably in high school and possibly just moving into college life. It will get better in college, don't worry. It did for me. When you get up away from society and family, home life. But if we want to backtrack a bit, home life, it would be nice if we could live more like the ancient rishis lived of India, where the children were taught the great truths and they could first understand words. And it wasn't just a matter of, oh, let's get together and read a certain scripture on Sunday. No, we get up every morning and we meditate together, and then we read the scripture together, and then parents and children discuss the scripture together, and the father and mother should be able to answer all the questions, and if they can't, they'll go to the guru with the whole family and they'll answer the question there. You're on the trail of the true purpose of life. You haven't fallen into some misconception about why you're in the body, sort of let Maya have its way, and so that it seeps into all the cracks in your waking, sleeping, and dreaming states. And you wake up with it, you're like a fish with the net in your mouth, thinking you're safe, sunk deep in the mud. So no, we get up in the morning every day and we put ourselves into these, and if we do that every day, it becomes a habit, just like anything else becomes a habit that we do, bad and good. Only this habit strengthens our spiritual life. And now we're a tight-knit family, and we love each other forever, and we're there for each other forever, and we're generous, we're selfless, we share with each other, we think of others before we think of ourselves. What happened to those kinds of children and families? All the good virtues are brought forth, in other words, out of us. Because both vice and virtue, another duality, are there in the mind. And which one are you going to accent? Well, in many of the households of today, unfortunately, the materialistic cultures particularly are trying to send their children to school for all the wrong reasons. I just read about a person who, actually, I've been waiting to read about such a child, who never went to school but was trained all by the parents. And what a beautiful person that was. I read about him. So these conventions that settle in on us, not just religious conventions, because we're familiar with those, but these conventions of everyday life too, schooling and work and job and so forth, we really need to keep breaking them down, especially if they begin to show themselves up as being barriers to our spiritual life. Our spiritual life is the real purpose we're here. There's no other purpose for that. So I know I'm talking around the question a little bit. That's a little bit of history and a little bit of my own feeling about what a household should be, a dharmic household they call it. And if you find yourself in a household that's not dharmic or has forgotten the Dharma, then yes, you have a problem there. And quite often it's a matter of biding time until you can get free and not losing your original intention about seeking wisdom, about seeking spiritual life, and as much as you can work that into your life while you're amidst your parents and your siblings, that's going to be good for you and for them, even at great risk and hardship to you. There was one story I can tell you that's a little bit humorous and also a little bit odd. That Sri Krishna used to talk about the tantric aspirant who went into the graveyard at night to practice sitting on a corpse, because that's supposed to get rid of the fear of death and so forth, the fear of decay and all that. So he would go into the graveyard and find a corpse that hadn't been buried and sit on it. One night he was sitting on it, on the chest cavity, facing it right there, and this pressure of his body on the chest cavity made the mouth open horribly. And it scared him. So next time he went there, he put some grams and pieces of rice and sweets in his pocket so that when the corpse opened his mouth, he could just throw them in there and appease the spirit. So it would leave him alone so he could meditate. This is a very strange story to the West, no doubt, because tantric practices in India are very different than much of what we've seen here, although we've heard of some of them. But that dead corpse, he's not just talking about a tantric practice there, he's actually got a huge meaning behind the story. It's basically the dead corpse is the corpse of convention. It's anyone and anything that has become conventional and is not pursuing spiritual life anymore, has forgotten the true meaning of life. It could be parents, could be siblings, could be friends, could be family, could be schools, could be churches. Anything that's fallen into the conventional run of things is now a barrier to your spiritual practice and progress. So that's the corpse of convention that you're sitting on in the graveyard of this life. Now, the grams and things that you keep in your pocket, those are appeasements. So, as a teenager, this is good advice. You should probably do what your parents want, and do what your friends want, and do what school wants, and do what church wants, just a little bit. But hold something back, because if it's conventional, it's not ultimately healthy for you. You're biding your time and appeasing them and making them happy so that they will leave you alone long enough so that you can get a little peace, so you can meditate on God. Or study your scripture. So, if you have to do something with the family and you don't want to, forbear it, go ahead and do it. Smile pleasantly, and then find some time after they're happy with you and they're leaving you alone for a while to pursue your spiritual life. This is advice very good given in the West. Sometimes in old India you didn't have to give it because all parents were dharmic and they wanted you to study the scripture. They wanted you to consider monasticism if you were up for it. Many of the old dharmic families, if you came to them and said, "I want to be a monk," your mother and father would be very pleased. And that's not the case so much nowadays. They think that maybe you're trying to run away from the world, or you're not going to support them when you get older. They will have some sort of intention for you to support them when you got older. But basically you are supporting them because you're going to get enlightenment through such vocations and through such practices, and then you're going to come back and enlighten others. I mean, imagine Lord Buddha, one of the greatest spiritual beings that ever walked the planet, was married and had a child. He went to a courtesan once to learn the art of lovemaking. Lord Buddha. So basically, this is a person who came back and freed everyone, gave the teaching of Buddhism that he got out of nirvana to everyone that was in his family before. He gave them all the opportunity to find enlightenment through what he had found. So very important to note that beings of great spiritual magnitude have been through the world too, and have seen all the world has to offer, and has also come up against many of these difficulties and worked through them. So there you are, you're amongst good company. And therefore go ahead with your best intent towards reaching this highest goal. That's how you live in a chaotic home, and maybe live among friends who are disinterested. Maybe you have an opportunity to bring a little peace into the home and also attract a friend to your path. But you have to be set in it yourself. Now, in the remaining time, if we have any?
2 minutes.
We have just 2 minutes. How does one overcome distraction during meditation? As soon as the mind starts to settle down and become focused, some worldly ideas pop up and off I go again. Yes, so there are 4 very difficult propositions to the art of meditation. The first is laziness, sleepiness. Who hasn't experienced that when they tried to meditate early on? There's restlessness. Basically, those are tamas and rajas, these gunas kicking in. And then there is brooding on dualities. That's why meditating on dualities is better than brooding on dualities, because if you understand virtue and vice and darkness and light and all the things, form and formlessness, as we've been talking about today in this satsang, then you're going to be master of them. To understand them and know them is to master them. To not know them is to live in fear of them. And fear is one of those ingredients in that curtain of nescience. It's one of those elements in the samskara, in the human samskara, in the brain, in the mind. So very important then to get over this problem with dualities always recurring in your mind. good and bad, virtue and vice, so forth. So that will come to you in meditation as one of the three obstacles. The fourth is, symbolically enough, because we just mentioned it, bliss. Having bliss in meditation is considered an obstacle, and probably I've already explained that, because there are higher samadhis than the samadhi of bliss. So you don't want to stop. You want to go all the way to the ultimate Brahman, don't you? And know your true self as being identical with Brahman. So bliss might stop you short of that. And I know many of my students, when they hear this teaching, say, "Oh, Babaji, I'd be happy with a little bliss in meditation." Yes, of course that's allowed, and it's going to happen anyway. But just know that, as again, if you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he explains it very nicely, how that you transcend these chakras, and you want to have this experience at the very highest of all chakras, or highest levels. After that, then everything is known to you, and you're free. And that is true freedom. Being attached to anything else, including bliss, would not quite be freedom. You'd be attached to bliss, wouldn't you? So, this peace that passes all understanding, this bliss that passes all understanding, this love that passes all understanding, and this non-dual wisdom that passes all understanding, that's something entirely different. That is not a problem, that is not an obstacle. That you want, and that you want to identify with and realize, and reach the highest goal of human existence. So I think we've used up our time for satsang tonight with 5 very great questions. Thank you so much to the live streaming audience. Let's together end with a chant and then call it a night. Om Tatsnayo, Om Tatsnayo, Navrinni Mahe, Gatong Yagyaya, Gatong Ye Nupataye, Daivi Swastarastu Naha, Swastir Manusevyaha, Urdvam Chikatu Bhesajam, Sangnawastu Dvipade Samchatushpate, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we offer all into the Great Self. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May all blessings be upon us. May peace be unto the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity also abide with us. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om